our policy focused on introducing human in the loop types of reviews. It focused on fact checking and checking for accuracy of the information and attribution to be transparent. Every day city government makes decisions and takes actions that have profound impacts on the lives of residents. And I think we have a responsibility to identify and manage the AI risks and the uses of AI in our environment to ensure and to allow our residents to see that they are being used in ways that align with the city's goals and values.
Hi, I'm Boaz, founder and CEO of Simply Augmented, and I'm excited that you're tuning in to the Shift AI podcast, a show that explores what it takes to thrive and adapt to the changing workplace in the digital age of remote work and AI. In today's episode, I'm thrilled to have Jim Lauder as our guest. Jim is the CTO of the City of Seattle and has spent his career working in the public sector and in higher education, and recently was instrumental in setting the AI guidelines and standards for the City of Seattle. If you're someone interested in the way that AI is developing as a tool to be used in local government, you are not going to want to miss this episode. We also want to send out a special thank you to CIBC Innovation Bank and Simply Augmented for sponsoring this episode. This is going to be a great show, and we're super excited to talk to Jim today. We can't wait to learn more. Let's get to it. We're coming on to the Shift AI podcast. I am really excited to talk to you today.
I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me. Thanks for inviting me. This is going to be fun.
So Jim, you are the Chief Technology Officer in the City of Seattle, and you've been doing a lot of work and thinking a lot about AI. So we're going to get into all of that. I'm excited about hearing your perspective on all of that. But before I start, I want to give the audience a little bit of background on you and how you got to this position. So way back, you were at the University of Iowa and you studied film studies, and which kind of led to a lot of the work that you were doing in information technology. What's interesting about your background is that you've been at a lot of really big institutions. So you've been the director of information technology at Seattle University, University of Washington, Seattle Public Library. And now you are, as I said, the Chief Technology Officer at the City of Seattle. And one of the things that brought you to my attention was some of the work that you guys did with guidelines related to AI. And I know that you guys have been thinking a lot about it. But did I get everything right in terms of your background? Did I miss anything? You can fill in if I did.
Yeah. I spent some time as IT director for the law school at University of Wisconsin as well. I'm from the Midwest originally. Yeah, grew up outside of Detroit, Michigan. Went to school there. That's where I picked up film studies as a discipline. And that took me to the University of Iowa for graduate school. And while I was there in my PhD program for film studies, I got a job at what at the time was a very advanced computer lab in the University of Iowa library. So this would have been the mid 90s. So the World Wide Web was just becoming, was just emerging into the public's consciousness at that time. And the facility I worked for was there to help instructors, researchers, librarians, and students understand how to use this new information technology in their coursework and in their studies. And I got that job. I had no real computer experience or technology experience before that. I got that job based largely on my experience having managed a retail store for 4 years. So it was really my customer service focus that brought me to the attention of the director. But I quickly realized that this was the future. And when it seemed clear to me the PhD program wasn't going to work out, I took a full-time job in that facility, and here I am today. So that was the origin story, if you will.
Yeah. And going back to the retail comment, I mean, when you think about the early days, like this show is about the future of work. So I always like to go back to the original job where you actually got paid. So was that in retail?
Yeah.
Was that something that you were doing at that time?
Yeah, I mean, there was a stint in high school where I was doing some telemarketing, and I guess I'm publicly outing myself as one of the annoying people that call people during dinner time and ask for money for various things. But that was in the 80s, and I didn't know any better. I'd say my first real job was assistant manager at Pier 1 Imports in Dearborn, Michigan.
Yeah.
So if you need to know anything about wicker furniture, I'm your guy. But I did learn a lot in that period. I started as a stock clerk, and within 3 months, I had an assistant manager badge on because they needed somebody to serve in that role, and I was, responsible enough to step up and do it with no experience and really no idea of what that really meant. But that's where I learned, a lot of the core traits that still serve me today. I learned how to manage people. I learned how to engage with and help understand what customers need and how to match them up to the solution that would work for them. And it's, definitely different to have a conversation with somebody who works in the Department of Transportation who needs a system to manage, intersection traffic, than it is somebody who's looking for a piece of, wall decor for their bedroom. But, the process of learning what people need and what would work for them and having that conversation and being open to hearing what they have to say, that's all basically the same skill. That was my first job really that I would consider to be a true job, is working at Pier 1 Imports for 4 years.
It's amazing. Now your constituency is so much larger, of course, but I've heard a lot of people answer that question on this show with retail as the answer. And it has been something that has impacted them throughout their lives, how to delight customers, how to help customers, and how to help constituents. So I love that answer. Were your parents technologists? Were they into technology? Was that something that was happening around the home when you were growing up?
Not really at all. We had a Commodore VIC-20 computer that my dad bought. And I learned a small amount of basic programming when I was in junior high. But it was never really a focus. It wasn't anything that I really dove into. I had friends who got really into personal computers once they became consumer items, whether it was the Radio Shack, Tandy computer or whatever it was, the TRS-80, I think. Yeah, was on a couple of people's, plugged into a couple of people's TV sets, if I recall correctly. But no, my dad was a city employee. He was a clerk with the city of Dearborn's tax department and lifelong civil servant. My mother's a high school teacher. She taught high school Spanish. So yeah, I like to think that I ended up with kind of an amalgamation of their backgrounds, both academic and civil service.
Yeah,
without fully intending to, but that ended up what's happened.
And now, before we dive deeper, I want to take a quick moment and tell you a little bit about one of our podcast partners. As a listener of this show, I know you're trying to stay on top of all things AI and tech, which is why you have to check out the amazing GeekWire podcast, produced by GeekWire and hosted by Todd Bishop. It's a treasure of insights featuring industry leaders and the latest tech trends that are shaping our world, and the perfect companion podcast to shift AI. GeekWire podcast is where technology meets curiosity and covers the world of technology, startups, and geek culture. Expand your tech horizons and join the conversation. Tune into the GeekWire podcast today, a perfect complement to our own discussions here. Don't miss out. Follow the GeekWire podcast on Apple Podcast, Spotify, or your favorite listening app. Now back to the episode.
Well, I want to dive into what you're doing now and talk a little bit about your role first, because I know it's way bigger than just the AI work that you've been doing. But let's just maybe tell the audience a bit about your role and how that fits into what the city of Seattle is doing in regards to technology.
Sure. So the city of Seattle, so the Seattle IT department, which is the department that I'm directing currently, we provide consolidated IT services for the most, if not all, of the city's departments in the executive branch. So in 2016, all IT functions and IT employees were merged, were consolidated into our department. And so everything from acquisitions and procurement to operational management to IT projects to application development is all done in our department. We have about 675 staff that are supporting the 14,000 or so employees at the city. And like I said, it's a full stack of services, including all the things I mentioned. So it's a big enterprise. It's obviously not a international firm or anything like that, but it's a big and complicated enterprise. But what I really love most about it is that we are all partnering every day with city departments to deliver services that help improve the quality of life for people here in Seattle. And having that mission, being mission driven, is really important to me.
Yeah.
It's very important to the people who work for the city. And it's something that we try to find ways to emphasize every single day. If somebody, whether somebody's a network engineer or system administrator or an application developer, they might not have direct contact with clients on a day-to-day basis or really understand much about what's going on in the city. So I think a large part an important part of my job and an important part of our leadership team's job is helping make those connections to people and emphasizing, when you see a new city service launch or when you hear the mayor speaking about an important new program, this is how we contributed to that. This is how we enabled that to happen. Yeah. I think one of the most rewarding examples of that is the Seattle King County Health Clinic that's offered every year at the Seattle Center. It's an important event that delivers free healthcare services to anyone really. That happens over a weekend. It just happened earlier this month, and the staff of the IT department, couple dozen people are involved with providing the networking support and all of the technology management support for that event. And that's an opportunity for people to really see how directly the impact is that we can have on people in the city. It's incredibly rewarding to be part of that and to be part of the mission of the city.
Yeah, that is amazing. It's really interesting to talk to other city employees, directors of technology, and cities. I've been talking closely with the city of Santa Fe and the city of Oklahoma City. And Seattle's name has been coming up because you guys were very early in thinking about the way that employees were going to interact with AI. And I know that came out. There's a directive that you came out with that talked a lot about in New York, as New York's directive kind of happened at the same time. And so I've been really excited to have you on the show because I wanted to talk to you about what went into that. You were very early. So I'm sure that required lots of meetings with lots of stakeholders. So can you talk to us a little bit about what went into that and how you put together those guardrails for city workers?
Yeah. Well, I think like most people in the world, beginning of 2023, we started hearing a lot about this ChatGPT technology that was, and a lot of what we were hearing was how quickly it was being adopted, right? The fastest growing technology to date in terms of adoption and numbers of users coming onto the platform. I think without forming an immediate knee-jerk opinion about it, I recognize that this is something that is likely going to be a technology that city workers are going to want to use, want to try out, want to experiment with. And so we needed to get involved. I mean, I felt that IT needed to get involved and understand more about the risks and the possibilities. But I didn't want to do it alone. I didn't want to just sit in a dark room and, mull over it or just do it within our department, just assign it to one of our policy folks or one of our program managers and say, here, go figure this out. I really wanted to get the perspective of multiple stakeholders. And so we did issue a provisional policy that was really just our read on things at the time. And that was in March of 2023. And it was during that time that I became aware of different efforts going on around the country. You mentioned a few. City of Boston is somebody I'd put on that list. They were pretty early out of the gate. But we took a pretty thoughtful and for government at least pretty rapid, I think, approach to engaging stakeholders at the University of Washington, at the Allen Institute for AI, from our own citizen advisory board, our community technology advisory board, and in the vendor community. We brought in some folks from Microsoft, and we consulted with folks from Adobe and from AWS to give us their perspectives on what was emerging. So, we tried to take a very holistic look at it, and came out with, issued our final policy, or I should say our current policy is not final, but our current policy in October. And I think that it is guided by some very common sense approaches focused on what's new and what's novel about this technology. I think one of the directions I gave the group was, we've got lots of policies, and some of them may actually be applicable to this technology, right? We have a very strong and we were one of the first in the country to issue a pretty comprehensive data privacy policy.
Yeah.
Well, that applies. There's really sort of nothing new about our mandate to protect the public's privacy or the public's data. Whatever system we put it in, whether it's, a traditional IT system or a new AI system, we just needed to highlight really more than come up with anything new, and take it as an opportunity to remind our employees, everything that has always applied to technology applies to this.
Yeah.
The only real novelty that we were concerned about was the potential for these systems, especially the generative AI systems is what we focused on, to produce material that would end up being, that would end up speaking on behalf of the city. Right. So our policy focused on introducing human in the loop types of reviews. It focused on, fact checking and checking for accuracy of the information and attribution. Like, we want to put something out there and say, this was generated in whole or in part by this particular GPT technology, to be transparent. Every day city government makes decisions and takes actions that have profound impacts on the lives of residents. And I think we have a responsibility to identify and manage the AI risks and the uses of AI in our environment, to ensure and to allow our residents to see that they are being used in ways that align with the city's goals and values.
Yeah.
So that was the driving force behind doing it. And we learned a lot along the way. And I think we engaged with a lot of really interesting people that we hope to have ongoing relationships with.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm glad that you guys did it so early, because I think it really set the stage for, what has happened now, 2024. We're recording this in March of 2024. And now we have a task force after the session ended in the state assembly. So now we have an AI task force, and that was spearheaded by Joe Wynn, who was also on the show recently. And the governor of the state of Washington just issued an executive order following what happened in Oklahoma and Wisconsin and other states. So I'm starting to see some momentum around this from a legislative point of view that I think, you guys were really in the lead. When you think about what's happening in the city, though, and what the mayor is talking about right now, have you been brought into conversations about his view on AI, how that's all shaping up? Because I think there's kind of a city of Seattle position too at the mayor's level. Can you talk a little bit about that, what you can share at this point?
Back in June of 2023, I had the honor to accompany the mayor to a meeting of the U.S. Conference of Mayors in Columbus, Ohio. The Mayor Harrell is the chair of that organization's Technology and Innovation Committee. And, as you can imagine, generative AI was top of mind for most of the city leaders who were present at that conference. And so I was able to present our work to date and raise questions that I felt city leaders needed to be considering as they approach this this new world, and that was very rewarding. It didn't take long to start generating a lot of interest and conversation among the mayors who were present. So I am so that's been so far, I think, the extent to which the mayor and I have collaborated on this particular topic.
What was your takeaway from that meeting with other mayors? What were the pushbacks? What were the challenges? What was the general vibe of the room when those kind of issues were coming up?
Well, I was I guess the level of awareness of the technology was kind of all over the place, right? There were some folks who had heard about it, but hadn't yet connected the dots that this was something that maybe their city needed to think more deeply about. There were others, of course, who were on the other side of the spectrum and had already started the work of trying to understand and make sense of this and try to figure out what should my city's position be on this. So I like to think that our presentation helped bring some focus to that and helped answer some of those questions. But I raised, I guess, some specific points that I heard some direct feedback on that the other mayors hadn't even really thought about. So, for example, we here in the city are subject to the State of Washington's Public Records Act, as you know. It's very, very broad, and it's something that we take very seriously and consider to be very important to maintaining public transparency and trust.
Yep.
Every state has got some variation of a public records law, and there are some impacts to how and why the generative technology is used that could create challenges for maintaining the public records that we're required to keep.
For sure.
And that, again, is true of any technology tool. We discourage the use of non-standard technologies for a lot of reasons, but one key reason is that we need to have some degree of control over the records that get generated in the course of conducting city business so that they can be produced later if they're requested.
Yep.
And if city employees are using technology that our department is not aware of, for example, or the public disclosure officers are not aware of, then they can easily miss, important, relevant, and responsive records when they're asked for it. So with the ChatGPT service, the questions that one would ask around that are, if I put something into this system, am I going to be able to get it out again if anybody has questions about it?
Right.
If I put a prompt in and ask ChatGPT to generate a draft policy, and that policy ends up becoming adopted as formal city policy, could somebody later go and request the prompt that I used to generate that policy? And if so, would I be able to produce that? Is that considered a city record? Is that considered a transitive piece of information? So just, I don't have all the answers to that, and it's going to vary from interpretation to interpretation, but it's a set of questions that people in the public sector have to be asking about these technologies.
Absolutely.
And that was called out specifically to me as something that a number of people said, we never would have thought about that.
Yeah.
So that was good. If I can help people identify risks that they might not otherwise think of, then, I feel I've done my job.
I know that a lot of the job is managing risk and thinking about what the implications are of this technology and protecting the constituency and the public.
And now, before we go further into the interview, I want to take a minute to talk about one of our show's sponsors, CIBC, and their new podcast, CIBC Innovation Banking. As we all know, it's hard to get funding in unpredictable markets, and that's why it's more important than ever to work with trusted partners who have connections beyond cash. On the new season of the CIBC Innovation Banking podcast, experienced venture capitalists and entrepreneurs share the surprising trends they see driving growth in the innovation economy and tips to obtain funding. Because when it comes to securing funding, people matter more than projections. Whether you're seed stage or late stage, CIBC Innovation Banking helps entrepreneurs and investors grow startups into market leaders. Discover the CIBC Innovation Banking podcast and learn from the innovators of today, the market leaders of tomorrow, and those who fund them. Tune in on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Now back to the episode.
But what are some of the aspects that get you excited? What's lighting you up about not just AI, but about technology in general as you look into the future?
Yeah. I have to say I'm fairly pragmatic about technology in general, and it's probably how I got into the business, starting off with asking questions about, all right, well, hey, what is this stuff good for? And maybe it's not good for the things that we're being told or that's being marketed to us as it's being good for. But I do think I saw some very exciting, I think, personal productivity use cases at a recent event I attended. And I think that's really where you need to start hooking people is, understanding that everybody has a pain point in, for example, keeping up with the information flow that's coming in every day. When I listen to Senator Wynn's session or episode on your podcast from a few weeks ago, he talked a lot about the way that that's helping him as a lawmaker make sense of information and keep up with the flow. And, I think that the most recent time in which I saw technology demonstrated to me, the AI technology demonstrated to me where I sort of felt a little elation was in that area where, I didn't realize that I could ask this technology these questions and get these kinds of answers. So that's exciting for me on a personal front. At the city, our next steps in implementing our responsible AI program, our major next step is to convene a community of interest among city employees. And so we put that out there. We planned an event. We advertised it within the city and ended up with just an overwhelming amount of interest from city employees who want to learn more about the technology, about what we're planning to do with the technology and how their colleagues are using it. So the cornerstone of that event is going to be presentations by two or three, we're still working it out, representatives of city departments who have already started pilot projects or evaluation projects using some technology. And I will admit, I don't know what they're going to say or what they're going to bring. I'm trying to myself as surprised as possible. But so that's next week. And so I'm going to learn along with, a couple hundred other employees, probably, what our colleagues in Department of Transportation and some communication staff from other departments and some others are doing with the technology already. And, our interest is, of course, learning more about what problems our clients internal to the city are trying to solve, help match them up to tools that we can both manage in a sustainable way, tools that we can mitigate the risks of, but also the tools that help them be productive. And so we'll see. I'm very interested in understanding not just how these department officials are using the tools, but how they're evaluating how effective they are. Mm-hmm. And if they can help other people develop evaluation processes or evaluation plans, that would be really helpful, I think, to the collective, is understanding, how are we judging or looking at accuracy, for example.
Sure.
Which is a big flaw, a big gap right now in the generative AI systems, and a big concern of mine, especially. We'll have more information and more excitement, I guess, after next week.
Well, that's really exciting. I share the sentiment that you have about humans in the loop, and I'm glad that you talked about that early on and figuring out ways that humans were part of the equation. When you think back about your career, how did mentors and, folks play into your, where you are today and how you think about, some of these technologies? Were there a few individuals that stood out that influenced you?
Yeah. I was just sharing an anecdote with somebody today about, I didn't work for him for very long, but there was an individual who I worked for when I was at the University of Wisconsin. And I can't say that I can't say that he mentored me in the realm of technology. But the anecdote I shared today is, I walked into the building and he was on his hands and knees with a pile of paper towels wiping up a spill. And this is a big, former military, very imposing, very authoritative guy. And I said to him, what are you doing there, John? So there's somebody who could have taken care of that for you. And he said, I saw the spill and I'm going to clean it up. And he said, he spent most of his life on a Navy ship. And he said, that's just a practice that you learn when your workplace is also your ride home. And, and he said, and that's how I approach the workplace. That's how I approach my work. That's how I approach helping other people when I see them struggling with a challenge. We're literally all in this boat together, and this is the boat that we need to take us back to shore. And I thought about that, and I just thought about how profoundly that idea, like coming in, I can still picture the image of this, again, 6'4", very intimidating looking, physically looking guy in a gray suit on his hands and knees, mopping up a spill on the floor of the law school. And what that image, meant to me and means to me today, and what his words mean to me, and how I put those into play, all the time. It's something that I go back to. It has nothing to do with technology, but it has to do with understanding how to approach the work, how to think about the people you're working with, just the idea that we're all here to take care of each other and to help each other out is a guiding principle that has always resonated with me.
Yeah, that's really impactful. That's an amazing act of service. So, I've asked this question in every show at the very, very end. And so I'm going to ask you the same thing. When you think about the future of work and the future of technology, I want you to describe it in 2 words, and then you can elaborate. What would your 2 words be?
First word that I came up with was responsible. I had trouble coming up with the second word, but I do want to say, I mentioned accuracy and so maybe responsible and factual. And in my elaboration, I will say that I think those are aspirational goals. Mm-hmm. I have a lot of concern about, not just generative AI. I think, I heard concerns back in the mid-90s when professors were saying that, computer, information technology was going to ruin people's ability to do research, right? Because to them, research meant you spend the day in the library surrounded by stacks of books.
Yeah.
And it certainly changed the way people do research. And one can argue maybe, pro or con, whether it's better or worse. But now that I'm probably at the age that most of those professors were back when I was, trying to nudge them along to think, to get, Netscape 0.9 beta installed on their computers. I do think a lot about responsibility and a lot about people's relationship to facts, and how technology is mediating that and in some ways complicating that. And if I can, and if there's time, there's another anecdote I want to share.
Yeah.
I saw a demo the other day of somebody using a GPT system to quickly gather and summarize public sector salary information, just as a way to show it off, right? And it pulled information very quickly, formatted it into a nice little table, made the table sortable, and all within about 30 seconds. And that was kind of the point of the demo. But there were a number of us in the room who started looking at the numbers, started thinking about where was this information coming from, and there were two main takeaways. So I guess number one, The technology was demonstrated and promoted to us with the fact that the source of the information was given by the system. There was a citation, right? There was a footnote, and you could go to the source and fact check it. That was highlighted as a plus. Here is a table of data. It took 30 seconds to pull this information together, but here's where it came from, and you can go fact check it. And you mentioned human in the loop earlier, and we were kind of playing around with this idea of what just having a human in the loop is necessary but not sufficient. What does that human have to do? So I thought to myself, is fact checking this data really more or less time intensive than asking somebody to go get it in the first place?
Right.
Like what more work does somebody have to do to go back to the same source that the GPT system used and validate that, this data is correct? And then secondly, what does correct mean? In that case, fact checking is just making sure that GPT copied the data from this source correctly. But is the data in the source correct? Because it's not pulling from government data. It's not pulling from our own personnel systems. It's pulling from a site that aggregates government salary data, and they could have it wrong.
Absolutely.
So I think, I walked away from that thinking that what we just saw was just another layer put on top of a couple of steps removed from the source of the data. And then thinking to myself, what use cases would this be applicable to? We're going through the process right now in the city of evaluating our IT position classifications and the salaries that we are paying at those levels. And we're doing a lot of that data of collecting salary information from comparable agencies. And it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work to get the data to understand, is this inclusive of benefits? Is it not? Is the person in this job description really performing the same work as somebody in this other job description at this other agency? And I just don't see a future where that level of analysis would be capable for a large language model based system to perform. So great, quick back of the envelope, very high level, very ballpark. Here's what 10 different state agencies are paying their IT workers on average. Fine. But what am I going to do with that? I'm not going to make decisions based on that. I'm not going to set policy based on that. I'm not going to affect people's livelihoods based on that. So when in practice would I actually ask that question of a GPT system? So those are the questions I was left with. And so I'm still very much in the questioning phase of this of my relationship to this technology. But I just thought that was an example that kind of best encapsulated what my thoughts are about the present and maybe the short-term future.
It's so interesting that you say that, because it mirrors what we're finding out there in the world too. And this idea that content creation could be really, really fast, but it's based on knowledge that needs to be accurate. And we see inside companies, the role of individuals changing from content creator to knowledge manager, because it's how important it is for the data to be right when it comes into these systems. And everything that I see when I point large language models at big data lakes and data sets is how important garbage in, garbage out has become in the conversation. So I think that's a really, really great point. And I really, really appreciate you being on the show, because I've been wanting to talk to you for a long time. And I really, really appreciate you guys being early to the conversation and setting the stage for a lot of other cities and what they're going to be doing and the policies that they're going to have around AI. So Jim, thank you for being on the show. I really appreciate it. I hope we can do this again. Maybe we can revisit it when you guys come out with your next policy.
Yeah. And after our community of interest gets going, I think there's going to be a lot more, a lot of use cases, a lot more interesting information. And I'd love to come back, Boaz, anytime you want me.
Awesome. Thank you, Jim.
That's a wrap. Thanks for tuning in. Such a pleasure to have Jim as our guest on today's episode. Jim's dedication to the city of Seattle and to ensuring that there are standards set for city employees around AI has set the framework for other local institutions to follow. If you want to learn more about Jim, you can find him on LinkedIn. If you're interested in how he thinks about Gen AI and policy, definitely connect with him
and keep up with his posts and activities online. I continue to be amazed by the guests we've had on the show, and I'm excited about the ones joining us in the near future. I truly appreciate you spending your time with us. Thank you for listening to this episode, and don't forget to subscribe to the Shift AI podcast for more exciting interviews and to the Simply AI Weekly newsletter for updates on how AI can help you scale your business. The Shift AI podcast is syndicated by GeekWire, and we are grateful to have the show sponsored by CIBC Innovation Bank and Simply Augmented. Our theme music was created by Dave Angel.